Hey everyone, RogueGold here. Welcome back to the Division 2, and today I want to have a discussion about the ongoing Cherry Blossom event. Ever since the Division 2 team started putting greater resources into these kinds of events, right, like we had with Halloween and Winter, I've been making review videos on them towards the end of their runs, in large part as I think this kind of content is important, limited time celebrations, events, those were always some of my fondest memories from my days in World of Warcraft and Destiny. Stuff that visually changes the world around you, gives you fresh objectives and rewards, brings players together at a time other than new content launches. The Division has never truly had that, so I was stoked to see when they finally did with Halloween last year, and from what we can tell, it paid off for them, hence the continuation of it leading now to the Cherry Blossom event. As I'm sure you all know, though, things have not gone 100% smoothly this time, and unlike the transition from the Winter event after Halloween, I think it's hard to say that this event is a definite step forward or improvement from the previous iteration, so I decided to push back the first Bloom weapon spotlight video that I was working on, pull forward the event review video that I would normally save for the final few days of the event, and I want to get into all of it, of course discussing key drop rates, enemy spawns, the event loop altogether, and get into other feedback and thoughts that I have, areas where I think we did still see improvement in this event, as well as others that could still use some work. So, if you enjoyed this one, you want to see more from me on the Division 2 in the future, then be sure to subscribe. A big shout out and thank you to our channel members as always. I cannot express my appreciation enough for all that you do to support me. Thank you, but let's get right to it. Now, before we get to the big topic that I'm sure everybody wants to hear my thoughts on regarding keys and farming, I think it's important that we first establish the major change to the event loop that was done that I believe has contributed to this result of greater key scarcity, right? It's not just the fact that the actual key drop rates seem a bit lower than they were in the Winter event, but you also have less frequent chances per minute, however you would calculate that, for a key to drop. And what I'm referring to is the switch that was made from the event centering around a repeatable bounty, like we had with Krampus or the Houndsman, to now a purely timer-based open-world spawn system like we have with the Ronin. Now, I will say, outside of how this has impacted key rates in the overall rewards discussion, I actually do like this change. Primarily because it cannot be cheesed, which I understand is ironic to say after the exploit that we had this week, but the difference is that that was an unintentional spawning bug versus how bounties are designed at their core. Right? For the Krampus and Houndsman bounties, what you saw happen is that people would load into them, kill all of the minions for drops and keys, but then take themselves out with grenades or whatever before defeating the boss, because this means that it wouldn't remove the bounty from your roster, letting you in turn infinitely repeat it. And that's just how bounties have always worked, right? It was really only an issue when these event bounties suddenly placed relevance on taking out the minions. Now, I'm sure some people are going to say, what's wrong with that? I like that loop, and that's fine. I respect your opinion. I think it's incredibly repetitive, right? You're fighting in the exact same spot each time, there's no differences in enemy spawns or compositions, and overall it just broke the intended gameplay loop of these events, which was supposed to be, you find squads in the open world, you score a bounty, you go do it, and then you go back to the open world. Instead, what we saw is people would get to step 3, and then proceed to off themselves every 5 minutes to reset, and that was not intended. I would assume that was the main reason they made this change to begin with for the Cherry Blossom event. And so again, I think that part is fine because you're now actually incentivized to engage in the full curated loop of the event. The problem, of course, is that in doing so, this has drastically limited key earning potential. And I think the team really ran into two issues on this front. Not only have many agreed that the time versus reward ratio is just not here for the keys from this event if you're playing the intended loop, right, and not using the exploit that was here earlier in the week, but then also to come off of December's Winter event where the keys were given out much more generously, that doesn't feel good, and obviously those comparisons are going to be made between the two, and so I think it was a combination of those two factors as to why so many people felt justified in engaging in the Ronin exploit. So, this is what I want to try and get to the bottom of. Is there a way between event loop curation and the key drop rates that we can create a scenario where people feel rewarded for their time and the majority wouldn't rather turn to exploits or bounty loops? And this also encompasses the fact that this event is meant to be played over a 3-week duration. That has always been a tricky subject to navigate. It's the same back and forth arguments that people have had when it comes to prototype gear this season, because we can say that playing for maybe 2 hours and you get 15 keys feels not great, But let's say you put in those 2 hours, maybe 4 days a week for 3 weeks in total, that's 360 keys, which is certainly enough to get you all of the apparel, donate your 80 keys for the community cache, and then get a ton of gear cache opens. But inevitably, you're going to run into players who say 2 hours a day is nothing, versus others who say I only get to play for 2 hours in an entire week. And how do you go about balancing around that discrepancy? So before we get into specifics, I will say that while I myself am guilty of being a stickler for strong time versus reward balance in game, right? I'm usually on the side of handing out everything in 20 minutes of playtime doesn't really feel very gratifying or satisfying in the long term. I'm sure those of you who've watched for some time can attest to that. But when it comes to these events specifically, right, the major seasonal ones that we're likely going to get, I don't know, 4 times a year from here on out with Halloween, winter, spring, and then I assume a summer one, I truly believe that the core design philosophy should be generosity over scarcity, right? These limited time events create a sense of coming together to see some cool new stuff, and people want to feel rewarded for engaging, regardless of however much time they have to invest. A lot of people don't want to have to stay consistent for 3 weeks straight just to get everything unlocked. And again, I feel very differently when it comes to other types of events in farming principles, but for these seasonal events in particular, I believe that generosity should be at the core of the design. So, with all of that said, I have a few thoughts on how I would have gone about designing this Cherry Blossom event to better reward players' time, create an even more engaging gameplay loop that isn't so slow that it makes people want to sit in one spot and have Ronin spawn infinitely around them. This exact blueprint that I'm about to lay out might not directly translate to whatever ideas are in place for future events, but it's at least a framework and an idea. So, as stated before, I think that having everything tied to these open world spawns is nice. It allows you to dynamically move around the map, simultaneously take on other priority objectives or projects or whatever. You get to have some variety instead of just being in one static bounty location. I also think that having some form of a timed cooldown between these spawns is fine. It allows for some amount of breathing room. I know I've seen a lot of people say that they would prefer the infinite Ronin spawns just be the intended loop of the event, and I agree that that can be fun for some time, but if that were to happen anywhere you go in the open world for the entirety of the event, I think you would very quickly run into a Westside Pier situation from Div 1 where people are like, alright, I can't catch a break here. But that said, instead of just relying on that 10-minute cooldown before you have a chance to see another squad, this is where I would make a pretty fundamental change, and that is with the lanterns. On the surface, much like the winter event, these lanterns that we have in the Cherry Blossom event exist as a treasure hunt, right? You're supposed to find all 40 to get a commendation and patch. What I think we've realized from this event, though, is that it's quite hard to effectively hide things from this community, right? All 40 of these were found within like 5 to 6 hours of the event launching on Tuesday, and personally, what I think has been much more interesting to see is the gameplay tie-in that they created with these lanterns. For one, there's the sound and visual effect changes that happen when you approach and cleanse them. I think that adds some nice layers of immersion and further visual changes to distinctualize the event from normal gameplay. But also, if you haven't noticed, interacting with one of these lanterns resets your Kitsunibi spawn cooldown. And so sometimes you'll encounter a squad, defeat them, come across a lantern, grab it, and then another squad spawns right in. In my opinion, that's fun. That feels like a more interesting and rewarding experience, as opposed to just continual squads spawning around you for no reason. The problem, though, is that as they are now, the lanterns are mostly one and done. There is a reset mechanic in place, but that only resets 3 of them daily, which is not very many, and it's completely random. You don't know where to look. So, my proposal is, what if instead of trying to hide 40 lanterns across the map, they more strategically placed maybe 20 to 30 of them in more convenient open world locations, and then just gave them a 30-minute cooldown timer before they then become corrupted once more and can be interacted with. This would mean if you want a chiller gameplay session, great, don't grab any of the lanterns and you'll get your squads to spawn in every 10 minutes. But if you do want some greater intensity, or you want to strive for that key farming efficiency, you could move throughout the open world from lantern to lantern, triggering consistent squad spawns. The obvious benefit of this is that you would earn more keys this this way and not be completely restricted to the 10-minute timer, but additionally, you would actually be incentivized and rewarded for moving throughout the entire open world, whereas normally we stay in just these various little pockets, even under the current post-exploit model, and then by the time that you've gone around and hit all 20 to 30 lanterns, the 30-minute cooldown will likely be done on the first one you did, so if you want, you can head right back and do it all over again. All the meanwhile, the lanterns are changing the music, the weather patterns, the cherry blossom petals are falling around to add that event immersion. I think this would be a far more engaging, rewarding, and simply fun loop, while at the same time not being forced. Again, if people don't want that intensity or they've done all they want to with the event. That all being said, on top of this proposed change, I do still think that a key drop rate buff would still be needed. Given the fact that you're waiting for several squads in a row for them to spawn in, I do think the Ronins should just be dropping guaranteed keys, and maybe there's an argument to be made that reducing the number of needed defeated squads down from the 5 to 6 that it is now to 3 to 4 could be good. And then as well, I do think that the chances for keys to drop from the Kitsunibi members should go up as well. Not guaranteed keys, but having them be much more common and frequent than they are now. But that's really it, right? I don't think you even need to redesign or implement tons of new stuff. Just shifting the emphasis of these lanterns to really being gameplay triggers, replacing some of them because of it, and buffing those key rates, voila. Now, is that the absolute perfect proposal? Are there not holes to be poked in the idea? I'm sure that there are, but that idea sounds like a much more engaging and rewarding loop to me. Hence, I would love to hear y'all's feedback and thoughts on it. The only other real notes that I wanted to make on this topic specifically is that under a paradigm where keys are distributed much more generously and unlocking all of the apparel items and grabbing a bunch of things from the gear cache is to be expected relatively quickly, the team could then in turn place a lot more emphasis on the community cache as that long-term goal for a full 3-week grind for those who have the time to do so. Maybe instead of just having arm patches for greater donations, they in turn add more reward tiers that would require you to donate more keys to be eligible as you go on. I don't know, maybe there's some out there who would not like that, but to me that feels like a decent compromise for still allowing the event to have some grindy sides to it without making that grind before the core and central rewards. So that covers the big main time versus reward topic, event gameplay, keys, all of that. I honestly don't have too much other feedback to give aside from two quick things that I wanted to section off here. For one, giving props where they're due, I think we can all universally agree that the cache openings this time are greatly improved. If you don't recall, the winter event made you watch an entire animation every time that you opened one. It took forever to get them all done. This time it's very nice and snappy, lets you open them back to back. And even if we can't get an open all caches button due to technical limitations, it would be great to see something like this for the apparel caches that we have at the very least. Alright, and then the only other thing that I feel like I have not seen that many discussing is the fact that no NPCs drop seasonal items within the Cherry Blossom event. Previously, we were used to the Loot Goblin, the Warhounds, the Krampuslauf dropping chillouts, harvests, quick steps, etc. But in the Cherry Blossom event, those things only drop out of the gear cache, which indirectly I think is also causing more of the key frustration that we're seeing. Again, in part, I think this was done to alleviate the bounty farm loop emphasis that previous events created. But now, under the timer-based system, I'm not sure why you would completely restrict loot drops for these items. At the very least, I feel like the Ronin should be dropping these kinds of things, since you have to work up to getting them to spawn anyway. But in conjunction with a change like that, I do think that some revisions and innovations are needed when it comes to what can drop from the gear cache. Right? People have said it before, but it's even more true now that you have a chance to get prototyped versions of these items from the caches. But nobody wants to see an Oak Carol, some snow machines, a bell ringer pop out of one of these. And it feels even worse now to get excited to see a prototype drop just to realize that it's one of those items. That said, some items within the same pool, like the aforementioned Chill Out, the Harvest, the Quick Step, those all have legitimate gameplay desirability, and so those ones should continue to be offered, in my view. But I do think some reinventions as to what can drop from these caches could be worthwhile to explore. I know in the past some people have suggested protection from elites mods. What if you had a rare chance to pull a 13% mod out? That would be motivating for many, myself included. I still have none to this day. Or a chance to pull exotic component bundles of like 5. I know that might not fit the bill of a gear cache, but it feels like something that would be helpful for many. Who knows? I would love to hear y'all's ideas there, but I do think it is time that we see some improvements to the item selection in these. Well, There you have it, everybody. Those are all of my thoughts and ideas following the release of the Cherry Blossom event. As stated, I have a lot of faith and care for this type of content. I think it's valuable for the game, and so I want to see it continue to improve and succeed. That said, I think many of us agree that this event has more than a few shortcomings, especially after how successful the winter event was, and so I really hope that the team can absorb and reflect on all the feedback to make future events that much better. But at this point, I turn it all over to you guys. What do you think about my ideas, proposals, and feedback on the event in this video? Do you agree with some or any of those things? If not, what are your own ideas to make this event formula work better moving forward? I'll be very curious to hear all of it down below. That's going to do it for me today, though. Thank you all so much for coming by and watching, and until I see you next, RogueGold. Ow. Oh! We just got a Ravenous! Haha! I might not be friendly. Let's go.
Coming to the Division 2.
Let's go!
And